first panel, high demand, low supply. So in this world, I guess with the onset of the pandemic, the incredible amount of supply chain disruptions with simultaneously rising customer expectations, particularly on the digital side. We have a fantastic panel with Philip, Rodrigo, and Charlie joining their moderator, Imran Haq. It's over to Imran and his amazing speakers. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Great session, Clint and Danny. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have both the coasts, Middle America also represented, and also some international. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay? Yep, okay, I will introduce my panel soon, but I just wanted to give a little context on today's panel. I'm excited about it. I have an eclectic group of panelists with me. Quick background about myself. So I've been involved with the Digital Animal Summit since the inception, along with Omer. My previous background was at Zoetis and at a large logistics company, CMA, where actually Charlie is part of now. And specifically, currently, I run a company called Sabi Digital, which is focused on digital venturing. So on to the topic. Supply chain is a word that's been used more so recently than it has been in the past. If you look at venture activity in the whole supply chain area, you'll see a lot of it. Danny mentioned that the ag space blew up recently in the last 5 to 10 years. Similarly, I think the vocabulary of individuals over the last 5, 6 years has changed in terms of investments, entrepreneurs, everybody's trying to solve the problem, which is a good thing. At the same time, over the last 2 years, particularly, we've seen demand and supply mismatch. And what does that mean? So prior to the pandemic, your personal experiences of a supply demand mismatch might be where you've gone to a concert, you've been smart and you don't want to drive, you had a really good time, or maybe a sports event, and you come out and just like all the other 50,000 people, you want an Uber, and you're clicking and there's surge pricing and it waits, an hour, you don't know which one you have. So, that's the experience you had before the pandemic. Then during the pandemic, which we're still part of, we've gone to restaurants, we're trying to support our local businesses, and there's been huge wait lines. The servers aren't there. We've been frustrated as individuals. So there's a consumer aspect of our expectations not being met based on resource shortages and other things that we'll talk about in this panel. And then finally, from a company perspective, what are companies going to do? Small, medium businesses, whether it's a veterinarian clinic, large producers, for example, that help us support animal health. We have somebody representing Cargill. So with that context, I will introduce you to my panelists. The way we'll set this up is I want them to share a little bit about themselves, what they're doing right now. Also, why are they doing what they're doing? What's their passion? And how they came to that journey. So I'll introduce each one. They'll share their journeys. Then we'll try to frame the problem as to this whole supply demand challenge. And what are we in the midst of? Some examples, some use cases. Most importantly, we'll get into how companies are solving these challenges, what they're doing for now. And then finally, we'll wrap up with what we get ideas and motivation and guidance from these panelists to what we should be doing in the future. How should we as a company be prepared to win in the future when these disruptions happen? So the 3 panelists I have, the first is Charlie Dihony. Charlie, I knew each other earlier this year. Charlie is currently leading ZBox. He'll tell you about his background. So Charlie, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us. One thing, by the way, so we purposely chose these panelists. Not everybody is in the animal space, but we chose somebody like Charlie, who is an expert in the logistics, transportation, and shipping space. And as we get to the other panelists, I'll give you their background. Charlie, lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I've learned a lot already in the first session that I just listened into, but my background is coming up on 20 years in supply chain and logistics. So when I first got out of college in 2003, eBay and Amazon were just becoming household names. I happened to go to work for an overnight shipping company. And based on the trends and the trajectory of the e-commerce industry, I've really spent the last 20 years right at the intersection of transportation and technology. So I became an entrepreneur at a young age, built and sold a couple of companies in my late 20s, early 30s. And then I got bit by the startup bug. In 2012, I rode in an Uber for the first time. And I was spellbound with how that was going to change transportation and logistics. And so in the course of the last 10 years, I've played a number of roles in the logistics technology startup ecosystem, ranging from early stage employee, growth leader, co-founder, marriage counselor, janitor. And over the last few years, I've spent quite a bit of time doing angel investing. That's become my passion project as I've been running companies in logistics and supply chain in the private equity backed kind of realm. I've been able to dedicate some time and personal resources back into the startup ecosystem. So I met Imran through a founder that he and I supported separately. And we were connected because CMA CGM, which is the third largest steamship company in the world, they're the guys with all the boats stuck out in the ports right now. They were looking to build a global innovation ecosystem around supply chain and logistics technology. And I was selected based on Imran's recommendation. Thank you again, sir. As the general manager and the leader of ZBox America. So that project was actually an idea of Rodolphe Saudet, who's the chairman of CMA CGM, who saw his father build this massive global company. And as he took it over in his adult years, he realized that innovation is very difficult. And large companies who are successful at innovating generally do those things outside. So CMA CGM founded ZBox as a multi-corporate accelerator to focus on supply chain and logistics technology. And we work with about a dozen companies globally. These are large enterprise companies in addition to CMA CGM and their other trade partners. And we work with them to define problems that innovation and supply chain technology can drive change in their business. And then we work with the startup ecosystem to match make and find solutions to the problems of the large corporate partners. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Charlie. That was great. Next up on my panel is Phil Harris. So Phil and I actually only recently met as part of getting somebody with his background on this panel. And I'll tell you a funny story because Abdullah gave me his contact information and we had some common individuals that we knew. So I reached out to him. I actually missed my original call with him because I had a fire to fight with a client. So he sends me a text and like, what's happening? So anyway, I got on the phone, we were chatting and I said, I just rushed out of work. I'm so sorry I missed your call. And then finally we started talking about where you're located. And I told him I'm in the New York, New Jersey area. He's like, oh, that's interesting. So am I. And then we talked about where we worked and he said, oh, downtown New York. And I said, oh, so do I. It turns out our office is on the same floor at WeWork. So, you know, there's some karma here. So hopefully we'll connect in person as well. So Phil actually is the founder of Write.io. I'll invite him to talk about his business, what he's doing and how he got here and his passion. Phil, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Imran. That was definitely a funny story. I've told that one a few times since. But I appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone today. So my name is Phil Harris. I'm with Write.io. And, you know, my background actually is not in food. I spent 25 plus years in financial technology, working across the financial services and capital markets arena in digitizing many different asset classes, ranging from gold, stocks, bonds, equities, and currencies. And I became, you know, a student of all of these new emerging technologies, ranging from blockchain, IoT, machine learning, and IoT. And I wanted to find a more kind of meaningful application of these technologies. And after some discussions with, you know, some of my kind of co-founders and in a circle, we found our way to the food and ag system and, you know, realized that, you know, food had not really gone through its own digitization journey. And a lot of the, you know, let's say problems that manifest themselves across food and ag could be solved with, you know, digital transformation. So effectively at Write, we help our clients. Our clients range from governments, large industry association bodies and CPGs and everywhere in between, meet the growing challenges through traceability, quality, and sustainability workflows. And we do that across a broad selection of food items, you know, things like cocoa and sugar, you know, limes and apples, but a pretty large, you know, kind of subset of our portfolio surrounds around animal protein, And, in the previous panel, there was some comments about, sustainability. Well, if you're in the animal protein category, sustainability is an unavoidable category, whether you're talking about, housing, feed, or medicine related activities. And I'm delighted to be here to share any of my experiences and knowledge to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. Last is a friend of mine, Rodrigo Carenza. I know Rodrigo for the last, I would say, since probably 2009 or 10. We were colleagues at Pfizer together, then at Zoetis together, and we've been in touch since then. So Rodrigo is actually a marketing leader in the Cargill Digital Solutions Group. And his specialization has been in the large animal space, but he's done both large and small in his past. So Rodrigo, thanks for being here. Welcome to the panel. If you could share a little bit about yourself, what you're doing now, how you got here, and we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thanks, Imran. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, great to be here. As Imran said, I've worked most of my career in the food animal space. I am originally from South America, from Bolivia. And ever since I came to the U.S. To UC Davis to start studies in animal science, I've been in the beef and dairy industry, passionate about the food that we produce and how we take care of our planet while we do that. And that's what's been driving me all along, and really trying to solve some of the problems that our customers, the producers, have in that effort, to produce sustainable and safe food supply for our world. During my career, both in sales, technical sales in the field, working side by side with producers, where I live now in Idaho, as well as California. I did the work there with dairy and beef producers, so know the work that they do on a day-to-day basis pretty well. And always respect that greatly. Had the opportunity to then go to New York, to where Pfizer was headquartered then, and had opportunity to work in marketing there. I've worked in marketing with Boehringer Ingelheim as well, globally, also on the ruminant side. And now I have the opportunity to be with Cargill, and I had fiddled with digital in most of those roles in marketing and sales, a lot of data analytics and trying to bring a lot of the data, as it was discussed earlier. Back then there was a lot less data than there is now. Obviously the amount of data is growing every day with sensors and the interconnectiveness of all the sensors and on-farm and off-farm data sources. But really trying to make sense of it all for producers. So worked a lot on that, both at Pfizer, with some work that they had that the organization had done to bring in data and turn it into information and turn it into action on farms. Worked on digital tools as well at Boehringer Ingelheim, and always as a part-time thing, right? But now I have the opportunity with Cargill to dedicate 100% to that on a global basis, and it's very exciting because we get to work with fantastic startups like the ones that are here on the panels today. It's exciting to hear their energy and their innovation that they're bringing to an industry, as was also mentioned earlier, that's probably a little bit behind in the digitization era. But excited to share a little bit of some of my experiences and learn from everybody else here.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. So what we'll do is we want to paint the picture of the challenges we're having, why we're having it, and then get into the solve. I think we'll start with the macro side. So Charlie, I'll ask you to paint the picture around global trade, container ships. You mentioned a lot of the ships are stuck. There's supply chain disruption. Paint the picture for us, for individuals who are maybe slightly familiar with it, so they can understand the large macro things that are happening. Are people hoarding things? Is it just a matter of excess demand? What's going on?
Thank you. Yeah, having spent the last 19 years in the space, you become like a de facto expert. But the great thing is, over the last 6 months, everybody in the world has become a supply chain expert. So, everybody on the call probably has some really great suggestions. And certainly, the world's governments are stepping in and imposing some changes. But really what we're dealing with is not, a COVID related supply chain disruption or an Ever Given getting stuck in the Suez Canal supply chain disruption, or really any one thing that's contributed to the situation that we're in. The situation that we're in has been something that's been brewing for many, many years, and some of the elements of COVID and the stops and start in the world's factories, and the fact that there was no products to bring into America, so thereby there was no ships coming to America, and all the containers were stuck in America and not taken back to Asia. Some of these types of disruptions have been exacerbated by COVID, but these were largely things that were building up over time and accelerated and exposed through COVID. But I thought there was an interesting sort of development that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks, since we're now in what's historically been known as peak season for American transportation from retailers, where they're keeping their stores stocked for Christmas and end of year. And this year we saw kind of a pullback on Black Friday type of activities over what we'd seen in 2019 and previous leading up to COVID. So where the world might have you believe, because there are ships stuck out in the port, and the world may have you believe that the store shelves are bare and there's nothing to purchase. I was following a reporter this weekend on Twitter who was showing pictures from Walmart stores and other stores around the country with extremely full shelves. And the early economic data coming back from this shopping season is that folks are just not buying as much as they were expected to this year. And so what that tells us as consumers is the ebb and flow of the accessibility to products will really drive how much retailers can charge for those products and how much money consumers are willing to spend. So I think what we've seen is probably as bad as what we're ever going to see in terms of the global container shortage and the chassis shortage and the lack of access to products on store shelves. And certainly nobody will ever forget the idea that we couldn't buy toilet paper in peak pandemic times. But really, these things were all sort of an amalgamation of complex issues that were driven by certain stops and starts in different places across these complex global supply chains. So as we sit today, we're starting to see ocean freight rates and domestic trucking freight prices starting to normalize. And by normalize, I mean, we'll never go back to 2017, 2018 transportation prices that we saw before. I don't think the asset-based carriers on the ocean side or the trucking side are ever going to give up this price elasticity that they found. However, the competition in those industries is starting to normalize the pricing, and you're starting to see more fluid movement of the assets as carriers have now had a few months to reposition themselves and meet the demand and supply imbalance that we've seen recently. So where it feels like the sky is falling and the ports are being pushed to 24-hour operations, which may or may not support 24-hour trucking operations and warehouse operations and other elements that need to support that. I think the focus and the pushing is largely coming at a time when the problems are subsiding themselves as it is. So I think globally speaking, we may not be out of this certainly in 2022, but all of this energy and focus by 2023's time should represent a new level of normalcy in the global supply chain.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie. That's positive. Excited to hear that from you. Phil, over the last few years, you've been focused around the around the food supply chain area. You talked about sustainability. Share with us a little bit, given the current demand supply challenges. Charlie painted a positive picture, which is great to hear from a macro perspective. Would love to hear your thoughts on how you see the problem, how you frame the problem, and what's going on in your space.
Yeah, sure. So look, I mean, my commentary is going to be less about supply chain shocks, pricing, and inventory challenges. I focus more on, let's say, the activity that goes beyond the 25-ton reefer container, right? So in that container is going to be pallets, and there are going to be boxes of stuff. And if we're talking, meat or other kind of related products, But the work that we are focused on is all of the related transaction and data attributes that need to follow that particular item from origin through to destination. And so when you start to rip out a lot of the paper, which kind of slows down a lot of the process, if you things like customs declarations, affidavits, and so on, when you have these, let's say, digital copies, even uploading a PDF into a dashboard that you can view to tick the box of, yep, there's an invoice, yep, there's a purchase order, yep, there's a custom declarations, yep, here's some food safety, maybe lab analysis, to have all of that documentation in one visible window to tick all the boxes to move the product or the container to the next person in line, just accelerates something which still operates for the most part like it did in the 1950s. And so, yes, there's been unbelievable investment in the category. One of our investors is Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world. So look, they're kind of leading the charge for logistics digitization across all different industries. I think for us, the trick is really getting the data from the beginning of the supply chain, have it all in one spot so that when an item does move through its kind of life cycle of the supply chain, that the specific data events, certifications, and any audit related attributes follow along with it, because that makes everything go a lot faster.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Rodrigo, coming down to the consumer and the engagement the consumer has, whether you're a pet owner, which has, that space has just exploded with individuals, getting puppies or kittens, etc., during the pandemic, or putting your hat on as a producer. Given the supply and demand challenges, given some of this disruption, what are some of what you have seen, both as from a consumer side across the different animal health spaces, but also from a Cargill perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see at least a lot of noise, right, about this blowing up of just amount of pets or just the amount of pets that are now in households and now going to veterinarians. And same thing we obviously see in our pocket, if it affects our pocketbooks when we see the prices of especially beef, right, in the market. However, as much as was shared already, is it's actually more of a complex problem than it is just a COVID related situation, for example, right? Like, we know that the amount of capacity and processing capacity of beef had already gone down, right, from 2007 to 2019. The amount of head that gets harvested weekly had gone down considerably already, and we were already seeing labor issues, labor shortages, both on both sides, on the farm side, right, on the beef production and milk production side, pork and poultry as well. We've been having a labor issue for quite some time there. And in addition to that, then we also have labor issues in processing plants. So much like was commented earlier, the pandemic really just exacerbated things and probably accelerated things even further. But there was already a trend of some of these issues happening. So with that, it's something that we need to understand and know that it's not going to go completely away, and that we now, as we look at where we're going in the future, it seems to be normalizing some it looks like prices have peaked. It is a supply and demand market, mostly a commodity. So that is moving well in that direction. However, I think on the production side, as you say, what are we doing? What are we seeing? What is our companies like Cargill doing with customers? And this goes to what a lot of the companies should do is really work closely with and partner up with suppliers, right? So Cargill has during the pandemic partnered very closely with a lot of our major customers, such as McDonald's, for example, to make sure that there was as things shifted from restaurants to supermarkets or from dine-in to drive-through, simplifying building efficiencies and understanding the consumers' new demands, right, as we go through just drive-throughs, simplifying menus, being able to make sure that there is menus that are I would say I guess, better suited for the drive-through and for efficiencies of transportation. Cargill has worked a lot with their customers that way, using digital tools as well that are being launched right now, which is getting immediate feedback from consumers on their experience going through drive-throughs with the menus, with what their preferences are, and providing that feedback back to the retail or the fast food provider in this case, right? And also, for major customers, redirecting supply to try to ensure that their supply, the demand that was coming, was able to be met by the supplies that they had, and that goes, from retail all the way to the farmers as well, and veterinary clinics, right? Is in this situation, I think it's taught us that we really need to find those key partners who are those partners in the business that you want to work with. And making sure that there are plans that you have ahead for how they're going to supply you, ways that you're going to find a supply of medication as well as services, in the case of farmers, services with their veterinarians, and going forward, making sure that there is a plan, knowing that this will continue to ebb and flow. And if there's ever another situation like this, God forbid, like a pandemic, that there are those plans in place, right? And then I would say on the pet side, I think there is an opportunity also to look at. Yes, there has been more adoption. There has been more pets that are definitely coming into the veterinary clinics. But we see that the veterinary clinics, really, what's happened is that they are seeing some other issues that are compounding it, right? The turnover of labor, lower productivity that's come not necessarily by the employees, basically because they have to do clean out or they have to do curbside check-in and all those type of things. That's really what's bogging down the system, and not necessarily that there is a just blow up of number of pets that are coming to the clinic. I think there's some information like AVMA put out that it's anywhere between 4.5% to 6.5% increase of number of pets that are coming to the vet clinic year over year. So, which is a great trend, but it's not, obviously, there's not a blow up there. There's other things that are driving that. So I think that's where digital technology and driving efficiency has been really helping. And we can talk a little bit more about which those are here forward.
Great. Thank you, Rodrigo. That frames it up. Phil, you mentioned around sustainability, transparency, tracking around the food supply chain, but you also mentioned that getting data and getting enough data, the right data. Talk to us a little bit about your perspectives on digitization. What are the solutions that you've been working with? What you were seeing successful? Where are some of the gaps?
Yeah, sure thing. So it's kind of funny if I reframe the panel title, high demand, low supply, we could also throw that through the data argument. I could definitely attest that we are being asked for more and more data, but I think that a few years ago, I've only entered this category in the last 5, right? So you guys have had a lot of history, but 10, 15, 20 years ago, digital animal might have even been an oxymoron. Like, what are you talking about, right? What does that mean? So now you need a digital record of an animal to perform a ton of tasks. And so I want to give kind of 2 examples of where data is a basic requirement now. So you hear, well, I think a lot across conferences like this, traceability is cute, but who's paying for it, right? Ultimately, are those costs going to be passed on through the consumer? In some cases, I think in premium products that already persists, but let's leave that for the time being. You've got growing regulatory demands, especially here in the US now, out of the FDA and the USDA. You have the smarter era of food safety, which is requiring for certain food items to have records produced within 24 hours. Now, the list is, I think, 17 or 18 ingredients. Animal protein are not on the list yet, but again, we think the list expands. But think about in California, there's regulation called Prop 12. And basically, it's a housing characterization, right? An animal has to be, in the early part of its life, has to live in a certain environment in order to be sold into the local Californian market. Well, now, there will be now rules and fines placed on actors that are not exhibiting or meeting those requirements by selling animal products into the market that don't meet the Californian kind of set of rules of the road. So now, now these are becoming demands. These aren't not nice to haves or marketing campaigns. And it's very much along the lines of now expanding that to antibiotic free, feed additives that might, kind of reduce belching and methane emissions in animals. So the efficiencies that you can get by having this kind of digital record of an animal that can kind of just transcend cost savings, good for the sustainability and good for the planet. But I think what we see, and one of the challenges from our perspective, is that the technology and the software is outpacing the language and the standards of these food categories. So you can't digitize information if it hasn't been organized in some fashion. We take that challenge on our shoulders every day, but man, it's a lot of work.
Thank you, Phil. Charlie, from a digital perspective, what are some of the trends that you're seeing, startups that you're bringing in, and what kind of problems are they solving using digital?
Well, I think just most broadly speaking, all three of us on the panel today, and certainly Imran with your career as well, we're all examples of a trend that you're seeing where the large incumbent companies, the large providers have the data and they have the operations that can benefit from the new technologies. And then there's also this appetite that's emerging for those large incumbents to work with these startups. So certainly, Phil's company is a great example of a product that is built to the large enterprise, and without, in absence of a ton of data, there's no value in what Ripe.io is offering. So, I was encouraged earlier when Rodrigo mentioned that in his role at Cargill, which is a behemoth in their industry, and certainly representative from a data aggregation perspective, would represent a tremendous amount of the industry's data. And to know that there's a role like his in place there, and there's an appetite on the corporate side to work with these startups to digitize these processes, to better aggregate and make sense of the data. I think broadly speaking, that's probably the most encouraging trend that we can all look at right now, is that the large corporates are looking for inspiration, they're looking for innovation, and they're going outside their four walls to do that. Now, I think there's a few product categories that are particularly interesting right now that are starting to span across a multitude of industries. And I think you're seeing some of these categories used and growing more pervasively. Certainly, the use of cameras to gather visual information, and then the use of machine learning on the back to train that information to make more informed suggestions and actions around that information. That's a technology category that you can almost not find a use case in any situation for that technology, because it's essentially it's the closest to the human brain that you're going to get, right, with your eyes, talking to a brain. So I think that's certainly a category that's very interesting and intriguing, and I think has a lot of applications for the folks on this call today. And then I think document ingestion, document digitization. Certainly we were hearing earlier about Ripe being the platform where you can append a document and you can put it in one place, and just by having it in one place, you're solving the majority of the data problem, which is making it accessible to the people who need it. And then, the next level of that, and I'm sure Ripe is doing some of this today, or will be, in the future, is taking the information from that document, putting it into a standard repository, normalizing that information and lining it up against, the other pieces of information that it's going to have an impact on, and using that information programmatically to make better decisions. So certainly at ZBox, our corporate partners are all, multi-billion-dollar global corporations that are taking in information and documents in multiple languages with multiple currencies. And most of them have large physical footprints offshore that are helping support a lot of these manual operations, particularly in the areas of operations and finance. So we're seeing a lot of companies really start to lean into not just digitizing their documents for digitization's sake, but really making sure that that information is flowing through to the proper databases that are interoperable with the other products and platforms that they're using to start to really create some meaningful automation in workflow. So, I think those are a few of the trends that I'm seeing, and I'm excited to hear, kind of what everybody else is working on.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Rodrigo, what are some of the examples that Cargill is doing from a digital perspective?
Yeah, so I shared a little bit of what we were doing, what our counterparts on that work on the retail side are doing. My side of the business, we work obviously on the animal nutrition end and working with food producers, with the beef, dairy, pork, poultry producers, and there are one big area that we are working on. Certainly, as was mentioned, we are working with computer vision, but we're all working in many other areas of really trying to get as real-time data
I think we lost
as possible on a producer. We find we have a lot of discussion with the producers where there's a lot of time that they're spending on capturing the data and putting that data together, as was just mentioned, of aggregation and integration of the data. We are working with partners on better integration of this data, these different pieces of data that are disparate right now, and trying to put them together in one place, because producers are spending a lot of high dollar value time on some of their employees or themselves, just simply searching this data, aggregating it, putting it together, and trying to make sense of it all. So we're spending quite a bit of time there with a platform that we have that's called Dairy Intelligent, where we are continuing to evolve that, and that is a tool that's worldwide right now that we provide with dairy producers. We're also on when we're talking about this supply and demand topic, we're really working on some areas where we are helping our customers manage the inventory better, their feed inventory. As we all know, feed cost is upwards of 50, even 60% of cost of production in these operations. So it's paramount that they have a real feel of inventory and the inventory of their feed, when to order. And there's a lot of that we can do there with sensors. We're doing that with some partner companies on sensor technology that can help sense the amount of feed that's left, the usage and trends of usage of certain feed ingredients, and automatic ordering for them as well. That can help them manage some of these ebbs and flows that we are, especially now that we're seeing in supply chain. In addition to that, there's things within Cargill, our Cargill Nutrition Cloud, where we have data that can help also pick the right, it's called supplier selection, which is understanding not only from a delivery perspective and from a supply perspective, but also from a quality perspective and from a nutrient perspective, which suppliers are the optimal suppliers, and optimizing those suppliers. Furthermore, working around logistics of actual delivery of feed, that's an area that we're working on as well. So from the farm perspective, that is a few of the areas that Cargill is working on or has products already in the market.
Wonderful. So I've been just getting notified that I didn't realize that we're pretty much out of time, but I do want to there are a couple of discussion points around data ownership. All of you echoed similar things. So I think the theme here is data. So I'll ask each one of you for a final word. And one question that Omer had asked, which I think is important: are larger companies, both from, for example, Phil, your perspective, Charlie and Rodrigo, from your large company perspective, is digital truly being embraced? Or is it, lip service? So we'll start the reverse this time. So Phil, we'll start with you, then Rodrigo, then Charlie. So just a word on what you see is true digitalization, as well as a final word on your perspective on this panel.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Look, I think the trend is pretty clear. It definitely moves slower than financial technology, the prior portion of my career. In fact, I did have to chuckle. I think a Series seed in ag tech is more like a B in fintech. Maybe I'll argue with the VCs about that later. But no, corporate actors are waking up. So as an example, one of our partners is Neogen, a competitor to Zoetis. We work with them in their genetics and food safety division, so we can actually help them model performance traits from breeding and embryo selection all the way through to the traits of the steak or the milk, as an example. So from where we sit, we get a ton of support, but it definitely doesn't move as fast as we would like.
Yeah.
Charlie? Oh, Rodrigo, sorry, Rodrigo, go ahead. And then Charlie.
Yeah, no, I would just echo that. It definitely is slower than we would want, and we're not seeing the rate of adoption that we would like on in the animal health space. I think on the pet side, I think it's moving a little faster than on the production animal side. But I think this what we've all discussed here today with what the pandemic has brought. And that has accelerated or exacerbated some trends that we were already seeing. I think that is going to accelerate the adoption of, and we're seeing some acceleration in certain areas. So I think that's promising. I think what's really knowledgeable, and it was brought up, is it's interesting, is that our companies like ours, like a larger organization like Cargill, we realize that we cannot build this all ourselves, and I think the startups and the technology companies realize that perhaps they don't have the presence on farm to really handhold, that's what it takes on farm or on clinic, handhold the adoption process, but better collaboration, better strategic partnerships with those that have boots on the ground on the farm or are working with the vet clinics, with those that are bringing the innovation. That work together can really help, I think, accelerate the adoption curve.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Charlie, last word.
Yeah, I think the spirit of the business climate today is collaboration. There's top-down pressure from the board level and the public markets down on these executives to innovate. In the future, companies won't be known as tech companies or non-tech companies. You will either be a technology company or you will not be a company. So I truly do see the trends going in the direction towards companies looking for new innovative solutions. And this has been an example over the last 18, 24 months that you can innovate and you can roll with the punches and change with the times, or you frankly can just go away. And we've seen both of those things happen. And, very interesting and joining the conversation today. Thanks so much for teaching me more about the animal health space.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Phil. It was a pleasure to have you on the panel, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And